Welcome to Topics with Indu and Sneha, a podcast of The Turtle. Indu is a mom, an educator and scholar, and a lifelong New Yorker. Sneha is a mom and a certified yoga instructor in Charlotte with a background in Hindu studies. Every episode, we start with something happening in real time and noodle on it together, because that's what we do. Our conversations draw on our research and our lives, and sometimes we stumble into new aha moments. These aren't polished takes, they're real conversations. We're two Hindu American women making sense of a chaotic world. If you've been looking for a Hindu American feminine perspective on what's happening around us, this might be your kind of podcast. So grab your chai and join us.
Hey there.
Hey, how's it going?
I'm all right. How are you?
Good.
All right, let's dive in because we've been waiting to talk about this topic since this really fun exchange of tweets was happening, or posts that was happening on X a couple weeks back.
Yes.
So this week's topic, we're going to start talking about temples, and we'll see where it goes. So a couple of weeks ago, in City and State New York, which is apparently a newspaper of some kind, a publication of some kind, published an article by Yashika Dutt, where she claims that BAPS temples, BAPS temples, often bar entry, not just to Muslims, but to lower caste Hindus. And then, various Hindu American advocacy organizations push back against that, pointing out that that's actually factually incorrect. There's evidence to the contrary. There are policies around this. It's just not true. And while the newspaper, I think, changed the way they didn't publish a correction, but they changed the copy. HAF then tweeted about it, and then the author Yashika Dutt tweeted, "In that case, I'd welcome an invite from the BAPS temples to allow me to enter the inner sanctum of their temples, touch the idols, and offer prayers as mentioned." So, there's been a lot of discussion around all of it already, and I don't think we need to rehash that, but we wanted to sort of offer our own perspective into it. The baseline being, of course, temples that follow the agamas, shastras, only allow certain people into the garbhagriha, the womb center of the temple. The temple, of course, is not a place of assembly for Hindus. It is the abode of the divine. And so there are various, beginning with the prana pratishta, there are various practices and rituals that are occasional, and then some are every single day that are practiced in order to maintain this as the abode of the divine. And so we enter the temple respectfully. Not every Hindu temple, and we don't have percentages on this, but not every temple follows the Agama Shastras and with the same fidelity. And I think as two South Indian women, we kind of notice that because there is a tendency for the South temples. I know South Indian is a controversial term, but as a Tamilian and Telugu woman, we're just keenly aware of some of these things. But we wanted to dig into this and kind of unpack what's going on. And I would say this, that oftentimes these discussions about temples are not about temples, but are actually a very thin veil to promote bigotry.
Yeah, it's a way to promote negative stereotypes about Hindus. I also want to add from the tweet that she adds that you hope you will guarantee they won't go do special purification after my visit. And you already know I'm a bhangi, meaning she drinks alcohol, right?
Mm-hmm.
She's clearly goading people because there's a norm around who can enter the sanctum sanctorium, because she specifically wants access to the sanctum of the temple. And we know that most temples, the sanctum area is reserved for the pujari, the priest, who might or might not. Actually, I read a great article that showed that a lot of pujaris these days are not like Brahmins, but they keep the ritual cleanliness that they need to in order to enter and do their duty towards the deities held in that temple or who reside in that temple. So we know that, first of all, not even a normal Hindu or even normal Brahmin who doesn't keep all those rituals will be allowed into the sanctum sanctorium. And then to like add that, oh, I drink alcohol, um, as a way to sort of show, because I think certain temples, Vaishnava temples, like alcohol is prohibited as a thing that the pujaris can consume. It's not. We know that it's not sattvic, so they keep that.
Yeah.
I know certain other temples that's allowed, especially in a ritual context. So that's an interesting dig that she made at Hindus.
Yeah. Well, and these digs, of course, are always made in a way that play off of the idea of like civil rights and freedom and all of these things in the Western perspective, right? Which is also in America's, particularly because of our Protestant roots, is particularly wary of ritual.
Yes, ritual is seen as something elitist or
Well, just um, inherently amoral
yeah,
or antithetical to the freedom of being American, right? Even though there are plenty of people, practitioners of many different religions in the United States that do take up ritual, and we have rituals of all different kinds that are non-religious as well that nobody questions. Um, they're just a part of the practice of different disciplines or professions or social norms, and yet somehow Hindu temples become singularly or are portrayed as singularly in violation of freedom. Now, of course, anyone is welcome to enter a Hindu temple.
yes,
The temple itself.
the temple itself. Yes,
The temple itself, anyone is welcome to enter it. No one needs a special invitation. Certainly, no one's going to go out of their way to invite someone who's intentionally being provocative. Although, knowing Hindus, they would go out of their way to invite someone who's being intentionally provocative.
Now there are uncles under this tweet who are like, "Come to my temple, please."
Yeah, exactly. It's like,
Yeah.
and the thing is, the irony is, of course, if she went and was reporting with any level of intellectual honesty, she would notice, who is allowed where, and it has nothing to do with what she consumes or, any kind of identity category. It's about taking up the responsibility of practicing certain things, including studying the scriptures and practicing yogic discipline, all of these things. That's where cleanliness comes from, is from the yama niyama, from Saucha, right? Like these are yogic practices, yogic disciplines that you're committing to. And not everyone has it in them to commit to that. I certainly don't. Like, I don't have it in me to make
we
all the
know that Art of
that
Living offers the open item to anybody who wants to take it up, but there are like requirements that you're committing to for the rest of your life once you go through that process. And even when I looked at it, I was like, I don't think I can commit to this level of
yeah.
Saucha in my life, so I didn't take it up.
And that's just the
It's not
simple
yet. Maybe one
right?
day.
That's just Upanayinam. That's like not even at the level of what a pujari is committing to, right?
Right. Yeah.
That's just like entry level. And so this idea of like she's not permitted because of some category, as opposed to no, she's simply not permitted because she's not taking up the responsibilities that are required, and those are the qualifications to do it. It has nothing to do with birth. Are just completely like that's not a part, and she's relying on people's ignorance, right?
Yeah. But also I think it's interesting to note how much economy this sort of comment has and goes into like this idea. There's a really great paper called Mantras of Anti-Brahmanism. It basically points to the debate that happened nearly 200 years now between the British colonial factions, the Anglicists and the Orientalists. And you see a lot of these debates, especially like the portrayal of ritual in Hindu temples as something that is polluting and impure. And in fact, they portrayed like the intellectual tradition of the Vedas as being polluted by ritual practice. And because it prevents certain people from accessing the Vedas or accessing the sanctum of the temple. There's some barriers around that.
Yeah.
And, when you think about Protestantism, they really take it up in the lens of Hinduism in terms of the Protestant lens. And that is really, I think, the problem, because and we've never really challenged these assumptions and examined them, because if you look at indigenous traditions, the ritual experts, like whether they're called shamans or what have you, always have a different level of requirement on keeping certain types of cleanliness, who they interact with, or like you see in certain places like Nepal, where for a short period of time, like they will have a little girl act as Devi, and at that time she has like a certain restrictions around who can meet her, what she can eat, and all these things, and that's limited to her sitting in the seat of the goddess. I think you see that across traditions. So there's just this like anti-Brahmanism, but also anti-indigeneity that comes out through this.
Yeah. Well, and what you're describing is this encoding of, and it can easily be dismissed as like woo-woo new agey, but 99.99 whatever percent of the world that we're living in of reality is not material, but energetic in space.
Yeah.
Right? The material aspect of the actual, when I say material, I don't mean just wealth. I mean the actual physical
Space.
Like, I think something like if you shrank what makes up a human being, it's like the size of like a sugar cube or something. Everything else is space, and in space is vibration. And what we're describing here is not, there's a discussion to be had around the idea of hierarchy. All of that is, that's there. We're not denying that there are these issues socially, but the argument being made here is around the theology, around what's understood and encoded in our scriptures, and our scriptures understand energy, right? So much of it is energy. So much of yoga is energy. So much of our philosophy is around understanding energy, right? And understanding that the material aspect of life, again, material not just being financial, but actual physical material aspect of life is minute compared to everything else.
Yeah.
And this is an expression of that understanding. And when we're talking about sort of ritual purity, or the practices and the disciplines that a purohit or a pujari or a pandit needs to take on in order to be qualified and have the right energy to do this work, to maintain the energy of the divine and the abode of the divine, we're talking at that level. We're not talking about at the material level. We're talking at the energetic level. And this seems to completely be outside the scheme of someone who is very clearly using a Marxist analysis, which is speaking about the material realm, not even in terms of all material, but simply in terms of class and money and wealth, right?
Yes.
And we know Marx was like particularly anti-ritual.
Yeah, he was. But also like his analysis on Brahmins was wrong, because they were not the holders. If you're just looking at it from the material perspective, they were simply not the holders of capital in India. And in fact, and this is still true for a lot of Brahmins, to hold have a show of wealth is seen as you breaking your cleanliness, like having too much stuff, and even
Well, I mean, let's be real there though for a minute, Sneha. Like, there are plenty of people who are like, I'm a Brahmin, who accumulate tons of wealth and show both. So we're talking in terms of like the difference between like theologically or philosophically versus what's practiced. And there is space to call that out, right?
Yeah. Oh,
There
yeah.
is
I think, but also there's a history to how not all, certain groups of Brahmins became like wealthy, right? Like if you look at Ram Mohan Roy, for example, though they always when a lot of times they actually conflate reformers who are from Brahmin backgrounds to people who are Brahmins, like actually practicing, who are keeping their dharma as Brahmin. as a Brahmin, right? They're conflating these two things. And we have to see, like, if you read Amitav Ghosh's book, you see that like these groups of Bengali Brahmins, for example, became very wealthy through the opium trade. And then you had like in Nicholas Dirk's book, Caste of the Minds, you see that he talks about certain groups of South Indian Brahmins, Tamil Brahmins, who integrated into the British administration. And that was like, then that group then got integrated into the like IT economy, like into the present. So there was clear advantages of English education.
Yeah.
And the groups of Brahmins who did not get an English education or kept their, were serving like small local village temples, did not benefit from the same thing. And in fact, were considered uneducated because they could only read like maybe their local language and Sanskrit.
Yeah.
So who is a Brahmin also matters, like how we talk about descendants of Brahmins versus people who are actually, serving in that.
Well, there's also this tendency that you see of people generalizing their family history and whatever analysis they've done through the lenses of, again, Marxism and privilege and all of these things. And not saying it's not legit. There are legitimate critiques to be made through these analyses, but they're not the entire reality. But these folks will look at their own family history, see that maybe someone they descended from made choices during colonization that they are now questioning, and then we'll extrapolate from that to the entire category of all Brahmins. This is how Brahmins are, right? So there's these gross generalizations that are being made. I would say of the different trades that practicing Brahmins entered, the priests were, often depicted as money grubbing and cheating and all of these things to undermine, right? To undermine Hindu practice and ritual. Not to say there aren't examples of that, but that's not. But like, if you look at these temple priests today, like, there's no way you could say that these are like the wealthiest, most privileged group of people. Whether you're talking about in India or in the United States or anywhere, these are not like the CEOs of companies who are like doing a side hustle as a priest, right? Like, these are people who are fully committed to this. And in the West, in a place that completely doesn't really understand what they're doing. So that commitment level is even more admirable.
Yeah. I mean, we should also talk about the fact that the groups of priests and practices that came from non-Brahmanical traditions, a lot of them were impacted by the Criminal Tribes Act. Like their temples under the reform movement were made illegal. Like that's also part of the history that we're not like acknowledging. And these temples under the Vedic like umbrella would have been considered to be part of the ecosystem. And the Dharma Shastras are very clear that you cannot impose your own rules on some other community. Where the reform movement, we have to like talk about this reform movement.
Yeah.
It was the thing that they were very Protestant about the way that they thought about things. So they took some rules that the British came up with, and then they took on like the purity laws, the respectability movements, and all that. That came out of the reform movement. And yes, those people a lot of them were descendants of Brahmins, but at the same time, they weren't acting from the Vedic worldview. They were acting from a very Protestant worldview where you have to come from the outside and change things to push things for progress to happen.
Yeah.
That violence is, you
They're
distinguish where it comes from.
They're coming from a concept of themselves that is, like you're saying, is not emic to Hindus, right? It's a foreign, it's a Western view of themselves that they've internalized and then said we need to correct this. Again, all of this acknowledging that there are people who are going to people and that Hindu society and whatever might have been happening in Hindu society, whether on its own or in response to different groups, encounters with other groups, and whatever coping strategies were developed, like, yeah, we can take a look at that. We can critique that. But that's different than what is a temple. That's different than what is the responsibility of a priest in a temple. Those are different conversations to have. And we don't really do any of the conversation justice by conflating, right? And there's also this tendency to equate casteism or caste-based discrimination with the existence of Varnas.
Yes.
Right. And so when we say things like anti-Brahmanism, I'm like, well, what's Brahmanism? Like that to me, Brahmanism is such a strange word, right? Because it sounds like an ideology.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, if there is a sort of a cult or an ideology built around that, then I don't think I would be too thrilled about that either. But I think that's very different than saying, like, wanting to eradicate the responsibilities of a Brahmin entirely, I think would be of great disservice to the spiritual community of Hindus.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I would say extend beyond that, because the Hindu worldview or the Dharmic worldview is not simply to serve those who are Dharmic or Hindu, but to serve everyone. It would be a great disservice to the earth and to humanity also.
Yeah.
But everything gets mashed together.
Everything gets mashed together. Yeah. There's implications upon implications. Like when you start pushing back on this, they'll, like everything will come up. It won't just stay at the level of, well, to serve in a temple, you need, as a pujari who's servicing the people as well as the deity, you have to hold a certain level of, Saucha. And that's the role. And that it doesn't stay at that level.
Yeah.
Kind of what I'm talking about.
Let's talk about Saucha a little bit. So, like I've been on courses, Art of Living courses, where we're asked to maintain Saucha because we're deep in our meditation practice and we don't want what's happening with other people to interrupt our own process, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just about physical touch, it's just about this awareness that we're impacting each other. And I think I don't think that's hard to understand. I mean, how many times have you walked into a room and you're like, oh, the people were like fighting right before I came in here, or they were getting along really well right before I came in here, right? Like I interrupted something. Like you know what's happening in a room, in a space. We know that the space is impacted by this.
Yes.
And so when we're talking about something like Saucha, we're acknowledging that we have that ecosystem, that thing happening inside of us as well, that when we follow certain disciplines, spiritual disciplines, and we talked about that in a prior episode, that discipline has an impact on our system and how we're operating, and that things can affect that, right? So, for instance, on certain festival days, some people don't eat certain foods. They don't eat garlic. They don't eat onions. They don't eat, shade veg, whatever it might be. It's not because those things are dirty. It's because they send the energy in a certain direction. Yeah. And on those days, you're looking to send the energy in another direction. I want to tell the story of when I went whirling.
Oh, yes.
So I had, I didn't necessarily have my own interest in whirling, but I had a friend who was very interested in doing it. And so they invited me to come with them to a place where people whirl on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. And so I went. There was a hesitation in me, though, because I happened to be on my period at the time. And I was like, well, this seems like a place that's going to be raising prana. It's going to be raising energy. And I know during my time of the month, the energy is flowing it's earthbound, it's flowing downward. Is this going to have an effect on me? I like, at first I was hesitant, but then because of peer pressure and youth, I went. And I mean, it was a very interesting experience. I definitely, I was like, oh, something's happening here. I participated in it. But as I was doing it, I was like, oh, this isn't right for my system. Something is going on here. This isn't right for my system. And it wasn't about disrespect, or, I didn't feel like, if I had felt like I was disrespecting them, I wouldn't have participated. So it didn't feel like that. In fact, I think I even mentioned it to one of the women there, and they were like, they said that it was fine because I wanted to make sure I wasn't violating any of their, their principles or their rules. But as I was doing it, I was like, oh, this is like something janky's happening to my system right now. Like, this isn't good. And then sure enough, I was like neurologically tweaked. Like, I just felt strange. My period was not the same for like months. I mean, this
Yeah.
is a lot of information, but like it really messed me up. Like, it
Yeah.
messed up my system, and my intuition was right, and I should have followed it, because that space where everyone was collectively raising the energy, the prana, which was very powerful, was not the right place for me to be at that time. And that's when I really understood what's happening. In a temple, the energy is, in a Hindu temple, the energy is lifting up,
Yeah.
going up. And the advice, the guideline is, well, your energy is going down. You need to honor that. You need to take the space and honor what's happening in your body. It is a really important part of, being woman. It's a part of our experience, and we honor it. And of course, that's been interpreted and misinterpreted in certain ways in society and labeled all these things. And interestingly, I think something that might have honored what is earth facing might have been reinterpreted as dirty, right?
Yes, they might have reinterpreted that.
Yeah. It's not that, it's just that something else is happening for us energetically. And to me, it really illuminated how like, that's why you feel good when you go into a temple and people are singing bhajans or there's puja happening, whatever.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's why I feel good when I like go sit in St. Patrick's Cathedral, because there's been hundreds and hundreds of years of prayer and all of this stuff happening. That's why you feel that when you go into a place where people have been practicing and uplifting the energy for a long time. You do feel it in your system. And that's what this is about. It's not about material standards and acknowledging what's happening. Anyway, that was a very intense story for me to share.
That's a great story. I think it's also interesting that, again, restrictions around periods and stuff now are interpreted in a particular way in modern society. When um there are, like, there's like that book, The Red Tent, which is fictional, talks about women who isolated during their periods in a red tent as a way to honor mother goddesses.
Mm-hmm.
So I think this was there like in the ancient civilizations, and somewhere along the line this has become interpreted as being dirty or bringing dirt in, like,
Yep.
impurities into a space.
I always turn to the Sri Yantra, right? And we used it in one of our first articles for the turtle, but we honor energy that goes up and energy that goes down. It's not that one is better than the other. Surely society honors, and of course in the Sri Yantra, if you're not familiar, I mean, if listeners are not familiar, it looks almost like the Star of David, right? Except it's replicated many times, but you have triangle going up that represents Purusha. And then you have the triangle going down, which represents Prakriti, and then you have both of them coming together. And amazingly, that's what's happening in the Garbhagriha as well, right?
Yes.
Is this union of Prakriti and Purusha. And Prakriti is the feminine divine. And so we acknowledge that the feminine divine is earth facing. It's no less, it's not dirty, it's earth facing. Earth facing doesn't mean dirty, right? And that has we honor that in certain ways, and that has a certain space for it. But and of course there might be folks who are like, well, I've gone to the temple during my period and I didn't feel bad and nothing happened to me, and that's fine. Okay, that's fine. That's your wish, and that's but it's not coming from a place of you don't belong here because women things are bad and dirty. That's not what it's coming from, right?
No, I think if anything, the tradition, as it was, maybe it was, I don't know, maybe it was practiced, especially like if you see in the Puranas, as it was, that was intended to be practiced, let's put it that way, honors the creative element of life. It's not just about moksha, but it also honors like the fact that we have to be born here in order to go through our karmas, and then we can actually, in a sense, return. But that journey is honored, and we also like honor other aspects like desire and um the fact that we might feel anger and disgust. We might have negative feelings or emotions, but even those are tend to be honored because, depending on which version of the story you read, some versions say like because the Rakshasa Kansa, he was obsessed with Krishna. He had anger and obsession with Krishna. At the end, when Krishna kills him, he actually achieves moksha.
Yeah.
So we honor like a wide variety of emotional expression, and
Yep.
we make space for all these things. Nothing is actually
Forbidden.
yeah, or rejected, but there's a certain way that we interact with these things. We will say, okay, you shouldn't, like, maybe being over identified with something is not the best. Like, you can identify that you're feeling something or your body's going through something, but you can also say, okay, but that's not really me. I know I'm going through whatever period, illness, cycles, whatever that is. But that's not the true person. That's not me. My person is whole.
Yeah.
And unaffected, especially the unaffected part of you is always there.
Yeah. No, I think it goes back to that metaphor of like imagining or knowing that you are the ocean all the way down to the depth of the ocean,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Not what's happening at the surface,
Mm.
and feeling connected to that, right? I mean, that's the whole point of going to the temple as well, is for that, is to feel the depth of that connection. And in order for that to happen, the noise has to go away. I mean, that's why temples are designed the way they are, right? I mean, and I'm not talking about temples as we may see them sometimes in the US, and there's no critique here. People are doing the best they can, but sometimes it's just a building with different murtis in it, but that's different. That's not designed according,
Yeah.
to um to the Vedas. It's not designed according to the Agamas, right? The design of those temples, the design of a temple, um, understands all of those layers. It understands the distraction and the erotic and all of these things, the ways that we're engaging in the material world. And through the layers of the temple brings us to that quieter and quieter and quieter and quieter space until we
Yes.
get near the Garbhagriha, the
Yes.
quietest part of the temple,
Part.
right? And like, that's where everything has settled, all the outside distractions, all the desires, all the confusions, the memories, the emotions, the attachments, all of that. Right? Like acknowledging it, honoring it, and like letting it fall. And then we get to this quiet Garbhagriha, which is why the idea of someone coming in and making this big to do about all of these other things having a role. I mean, it's absurd. It's just absolutely absurd. Um, and it also makes me wonder, like, why would this person want to enter a temple if, other than to make a point, other than like a civil rights, like a very misguided civil rights protest. I also think it's really funny that she's picking on BAPS because they're, I would say, in many ways, in some ways, more open. That's not true. All Hindu temples are open, but I just find it really funny that this temple becomes like such a site of acrimony when, unlike other temples, you can walk into a BAPS temple and there are certain murtis where anyone can perform abhishekam, which is not the case in other temples. Right?
No.
So why this particular temple? I think it's because it's probably bigger and better known and has been in the news. And so why not make it a site of protest?
Yeah. She's now looking at it from the diversity of practice, even amongst Hindu temples in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
She's just trying to make a point against a very visible temple.
Yeah. Well, and again, it's not about the temple. The point is that she hates him.
Yes. Yeah. Pretty
Yeah.
much. Yeah.
And I think this happens when, I mean, I don't think she would say that because I think she's using identity as a way to latch on to something. But I think this is why, we can't reduce the conversation about Hinduism to identity. And we've been talking about all of the reasons why this entire conversation, right? Because identity is like the very beginning of the journey of being Hindu. Like, who am I? It's the very beginning of the journey of being Hindu. If you just answer that quickly based on something and you think that that's it, I am Hindu is the end of that question, then, you just begin to scratch the surface.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I also think like you see things. This has this sort of like protest against Hindu temples has a history. Like you see it in Shabrimala and Indian temples too. So there's like this transnationality to these debates. And I think for Hindus, if you're not a devotee, if you don't want to follow the rules of that temple, the agamic tradition, whatever tradition they're following to create those rules, um, then maybe it's okay for you not to be a devotee of that particular temple or that particular form of the deity. Like,
Mhm.
you can find other temples, right? Yeah.
Yeah, there's no
So
shortage of temples for sure to visit.
yeah.
But also, I think, and we've spoken about this so many times. I don't remember if we've spoken about it on this podcast, but I think it just keeps pointing again and again to why our temples in the United States, especially, but I think everywhere, including India, we need more teaching temples, and we need to invest more in our temples, teaching about what is a temple, because
Yes.
you'll see people having these conversations. I think we've heard someone um, equate or conflate a temple as like a museum or a historic site. Like, none of
Yes.
that is what a temple
Right.
is. So obviously there's a lot of educating we have to do about what is a temple even, because it's not simply the Hindu counterpart to a mosque or a synagogue
A church.
church. It's
But we're like, again, I think you already said this, but we're not congregational. It's not that we don't have a congregational element, but the site of that isn't necessarily the temple. In fact, we can have some very small temples where the only thing you do is go in for like archana ritual practice and like get your blessing and all that, and you leave. Like they're very, very small temples that you can just do that. So
yeah,
um we have to like understand that as a technology, the temple serves a different ritual purpose to lift your prana
yeah,
up through your chakras. Um, and the purpose of a sangha, the equivalent of maybe the equivalent, closest equivalent to a congregation, is to allow for those discussions and maybe community events. And these, I think in the United States, a lot of times these things do tend to go together because it's just easier to develop the temple along with like the community center or the performance space or whatever. But at the same time, they're actually there to serve different purposes
they are.
and recognize
I
that.
would
Yeah.
say we're not congregational in our this is so complicated. Regularly congregational in our worship, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But we are congregational and I think we would benefit, we've talked about this, would benefit in rediscovering this and re-enlivening this, especially in the US, especially outside of India. Um, we are congregational in our spiritual seeking, in our knowledge seeking,
Yeah.
in our seva. We're congregational in so much that we do.
Yeah.
Our very metaphysics are interdependent. So we're not hyper individualistic as sort of the hyper intellectual lecturing Hindu might
Yeah.
indicate,
Yeah.
just in the way that they conduct themselves. We're actually very, very congregational as a society, as a Hindu
Yeah.
society of seekers. It's just that our worship, apart from things like yagyas and all those other things, um, our worship is because we turn inward so much.
Yeah.
But it's when you turn inward that you see the connection, right? So it
I
just flows.
I also make the observation that when we congregate in Sangha, for example, our focus is not just, we don't have like a preacher who stands and talks the whole time and then, you leave and have your cake. Like that's
I mean,
not,
I think we do have that, and
we do.
it's not very effective necessarily.
Yeah.
Very
I mean,
nice.
we like listen to Gurudev and,
Yeah.
we do that. But even the mode of Sangha that I've generally seen, including Art of Living and other spaces, is the focus is on the experience.
Mhm.
The Sangha like meditates, does bhajans together, will like serve each other, bring food together, right? And yes, there is a small element where we might engage with some wisdom from our guru or just talk about like, oh, I'm having this problem, and then when somebody else will like remind you, oh, you should think about what Guru Dev would say, something like whatever their guru is, they can kind of bring it up in that context. But even the nature of our congregation tends to be very different than I would say the average like Protestant church in the United States.
The examples you're stating are what I was thinking of more was some I'm using kind of very cynical terms here. Someone who's not necessarily an enlightened master, someone who's not a guru, but someone who has high esteem in the community will give a lecture.
Yeah.
And that more closely resembles the Protestant or the Western space than it actually does what I would say is a more OG Dharmic Hindu space
Yeah.
assembly, right?
Yeah.
That's what I was referring to when I said it's not as effective, because oftentimes it has more to do with, um, has more to do with the ego of the lecturer than it does the
Intellect. Yeah.
spiritual advancement of the people sitting there.
But also like the same wisdom given to you either like after meditation or bhajan sits in your system really, really differently than if it was given as a long lecture, right?
Yeah.
So I think our Sangha recognizes that usually that is also to be acknowledged, right?
Yeah. We were talking about this yesterday, actually, about how you see it in some churches, like you see it in Black churches, like they understand the role that music plays in elevating the
Yeah.
Prana. They're hitting certain chakras
Yeah.
with the type of music that they're singing and
Yeah.
engaging, and everyone's participating in it. You can't not move. You can't not feel something move
Yeah.
in you with that music, right? I mean, the words
Yeah.
we may not relate to so much, but you definitely feel something, right? It's uplifting. And then when some pearl of wisdom is delivered, the system is open to it in a
Yeah.
really different way. So
Yeah.
you do see that in some form here.
Some forms. Yeah.
Just
In
interesting to
certain
me that we
communities.
have that in our tradition, and some people engage with it, but you have this large swath of Hindus who are so suspicious of that expression of Hinduism that they'd much rather have a dry. And maybe that's what appeals to them. And I'm not critiquing them. Different folks, different strokes, but that's seen as somehow more legitimate or more
Legitimate than
than something more
than like
experiential.
yeah. So yeah, and embodied.
Yeah.
I think the embodied experience is
Yeah.
really important. And I think it comes back to the ritual aspect of a temple. Like when you're participating in ritual, yes, the pujari might be doing something inside the garbhagriha, but usually, there's always roles for everybody to play, especially if it's like a large puja.
Mm-hmm.
You can just go and do garlands. You can cook some food. You can set up the, chairs or make sure like the elders are comfortable. Like there's always a role for everyone to do. And there's also like role for, like we did Sita Kalyanam recently in our temple. So there was like, singers were invited to come and sing in, because there's a lot of time, like, when they have the curtain up on the deity and they're doing abhishekam, the singers are invited to like sing. Sometimes you can have dancers, and all of those things indicators to me that everyone has a role in whatever the ritual is. And everyone, when we are each playing our part, we're like supporting the whole structure. But a pole can't be a rope.
Yeah. Okay. Done?
Done.
Okay.
That's all for this episode of Topics. Thank you for staying with us. If today's conversation sparked something for you, we'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment and let us know what topics you'd like us to explore next. If you're enjoying the show, please like and subscribe on YouTube so we can keep bringing you our insights. We also go deeper into these topics in writing over on our Substack. Head over to our Turtle publication on Substack for deep dive articles that pick up where the podcast leaves off. Links are in the description. See you next time.